And Madam Clerk, could I have a roll call of the Water Commission members?
Yes. Chair Davis,
Yep.
Vice Chair Young,
Here.
Commissioner Cooney,
Here.
Commissioner Kameyer,
Absent?
Commissioner Keller,
Here.
Council Liaison Snedden.
Absent. Thank you very much. Are there any changes to the agenda, Mr. Hagmark?
Chair Davis, there are no changes to the agenda.
Great. That takes us to item 4. This is public comment for any member of the public who wishes to address the commission on items within our purview, but not on today's current agenda. I don't see anyone who is wishing to speak at this time. That will take me on then to item 5, which is the consent items. We have 2 items. Item 5A, the meeting minutes of the approval of minutes of March 17th, 2022. And item B, a contract for pre-bid construction services and constructability review for the El Estero Water Resource Center Electrical Distribution Renewable Project. That's a mouthful. Okay, I have a comment on the minutes, and I believe Mr. Keller has a comment on item B. On the minutes, Madam Clerk, under roll call, we indicate that everyone's present except Commissioner Cooney at the time of the roll call. Generally, what you need to do is show when that person joins the meeting. And as I recall, you joined the meeting immediately after the roll call.
Yes.
So I would ask that we
Correct.
amend it to indicate she joined immediately following roll call. And then under item 6A, the motion to recommend the approval. It says recommend the council approve the increase in appropriations. For the record, I think we need to have the actual action, which was to approve in the amount of $2 million from the Water Operating Fund reserves. Reason being, we could have had open-ended appropriations in that regard. So I think we just need to get the full action or motion in the record. Other comments? Mr. Keller, go ahead on item B.
Yes, so on item B, I support the approval of this contract for pre-bid construction management services. It's for the El Estero Water Resources Center Electrical Distribution Renewal Project. I know the mouthful. And it's been quite a while since we've actually reviewed that project. It's probably at least 3, maybe 4 years since we've seen it. And I think we've had a number of commissioners that have now been on the committee, and so in the commission. So it'd be good to have a kind of a broad presentation of what it means so that they understand it better. It's a huge project with respect to what we're doing, and just to understand the scope of it and where we are and what's the timeline. I think it'd be useful to have it in one of our upcoming meetings.
We can accommodate that. We were planning to bring it back with the award of that contract, but we could, if you feel like you'd want to discuss it before that, we could also accommodate that.
Yeah, I would think it would be appropriate just so everybody's up to speed with what we're doing. It's a big project and a lot of moving parts.
I think the question is to bring it back before the action's taken.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a comment, and I actually have recommended changes, additions on item A. Is there a motion to approve consent calendar? If so, I would hope that you would add the additions that I've asked for.
I move to approve.
With the additions?
With the additions, yes.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second with,
And I have a further question.
Go ahead.
Before the vote.
Go ahead,
I
Mr.
just want
Young.
to make sure what we're doing is simply voting on the pre-bid construction management construction review of 283, 389, because that's inserted in this big project cost estimation. It kind of gets a little bit lost.
yeah.
So it's just that component.
That is correct. Right,
Okay.
Mr. Hagmark?
Great, okay.
Okay. Madam Clerk, I have a roll call vote, please.
Chair Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Commissioner Kameyer, absent, Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and Council Liaison Snedden,
She doesn't-
absent.
Yeah, she doesn't vote on matters. She's only the liaison for future reference.
Okay.
Great. The consent calendar is approved. Thank you very much. Takes us to administrative items. 6A is the proposed update to water and wastewater capacity charges. Mr. Hagmark, you want to introduce this? Oh, Ms. Hoffenberg, go
I'll
ahead.
introduce myself. So excited to see everyone here in person. My name is Dana Hoffenberg. I'm a water resources analyst, and I'm going to be talking to you today about our water and wastewater capacity charge study. So just a brief overview. We're going to be looking at how we established our cost-based rates, and then looking at the actual charges themselves, and then we'll get into some questions and discussion. And so just a note, we did work with our expert rate consultant, HDR Engineering, on creating these. Unfortunately, Mr. Sean Korn wasn't able to be here with us in person today, but just know that we did work with an expert consultant on creating these charges. So to give everyone a brief overview, capacity charges are one-time charges that our customers pay when they are making a new connection to the water or wastewater system, or when they are expanding their service. They are in place to essentially provide some equity between new customers and existing customers. Our existing customers have been paying for our system and the capital assets associated with the system, and these fees are to bring new customers at the same playing field as those existing customers. So they're essentially buying into the assets of the system. These charges do not have any kind of operations or maintenance component. That's an important note. These are only based on capital assets. We create these using the city's planning documents, including our capital improvement plan and our asset schedules. To give you an idea of the scope of these charges, they do not make up they're not a large revenue source for us. They come in it really depends on the construction activity happening in the city, so they can very much vary from year to year. But they do generally make up less than 1% of our total revenues for both the water fund and for the wastewater fund. And just a reminder that this is an update to an existing model. We did a pretty big update to our methodology and these charges back in 2017. And so then we're updating it 5 years later. So this is really just an update. We're not making any big methodology changes or structural changes to these charges today. So this is an overview of the fairly simple calculation that goes into creating these capacity charges. We are using what is considered the buy-in method. So this method is where our customers are just buying into the existing assets of the system. They are not paying for future expansion, which is another method. That's not really appropriate for the city since we are a fairly built-out community and we don't have any plans for major expansions. So that's why we're sticking with the buy-in methodology, which we have used in the past and will continue to use today. So looking first at the blue square, our first step is to evaluate our existing capital assets and look at the value of those capital assets. And then we divide it by the capacity of the system. And we do that by looking at equivalent units, and I'll get into that a bit later. And then that's how we create our capacity charge. So getting more into that first step, the blue square, determining the value of our capital assets. So again, we look at our current infrastructure that's already in the ground, as well as our infrastructure that's planned to be built up in this current year. So for this study, that's FY22. We look at the original cost of the asset, and we take out any depreciation, and then we bring the value of that asset up to current value by using the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index, or the ENR-CCI. And this is, pretty standard methodology. And then we back out any relevant credits. So those are things like existing debt service or grants. So if we got a grant for a project, our customers did not pay for that portion of that asset, so we back that out. We also, when we're looking at debt service, we collect debt service through our rates. So we want to avoid double charging. So we don't charge for outstanding debt service in the capacity charge because that is going to be collected later on as we pay off that debt service through our rates. Also included in our assets is our council policy minimum reserve. So even if we have above minimum, we do not include that. We only include our council policy minimum reserves because we know that's something that we will always have. Moving on to the next step, this, purpley periwinkle color, I guess. So we're looking at our determination of equivalent units. So we basically take the assets of the system divided by the capacity of the system. So our smallest capacity unit is our smallest water meter, and that's a 5/8 inch meter. And so what we do is we add up all of our 5/8 inch meters, but our system is not made completely of 5/8 inch meters. We have meters of different sizes. So we equate those larger meters to how many 5/8 inch meters is that. And we use that, we look at a weighting methodology used by the American Water Works Association, known as AWWA. This is a pretty standard, again, methodology that's pretty well accepted. So for example, a 1-inch meter has 2.5 times the capacity of a 5/8-inch meter. So we would count one inch meter as 2.5 5/8-inch meters, and that's how we get our total equivalent system capacity units.
Yeah, go ahead if you have any questions.
I do. So I'm kind of curious as to why this determination doesn't somehow factor in flow instead of the meter size. Because with a larger meter, I could get, well, with a smaller meter, I could get the same amount of water. It'll just take me longer.
Yeah, so the flow, I mean, the meter size is a proxy for flow rate.
And I understand that, it's a proxy, but I'm kind of curious as to why we do it that way. Is it just the simplest way to do it?
It's the simplest. It's also looking at instantaneous capacity demand. So, you know, we size the system based on what's the instantaneous need of the system. So a 1-inch meter has a larger capacity for an instantaneous demand than, say, a 5/8-inch meter.
What helped me to understand this is, you know, we have times of the day where we're talking about peaking, right? You know, it's the 6 to 8:30 in the morning. Everyone's getting up, getting going, making coffee, taking showers. You have these peaking demands that go on, and that kind of establishes the capacity of the system. Our reservoirs, our pipes are kind of built around those peaking. And so that's what we talk about this. It ultimately equates to a flow rate. So we're basically taking these meter sizes, and when we say that a 1-inch is 2.5, it can basically has the ability to move 2.5 times the capacity of a 5/8. And so that's how it's basically assessed on the system. And when we look at it, we currently have 27,000 connections to the city system. It equates to 44,000 5/8 meters. So that's when they go through and did the study, they basically divide up the capacity of our entire system by 44,000. And then as we'll get into here, there's even more. The state with all these ADUs and workforce housing units have asked us to actually even break it down even further than meters to fixtures. So we'll be talking about that in just a second.
Thank you, Mr. Hagberg.
I can appreciate that. So it's really a charge for the ability to instantaneously obtain water at a certain flow rate. Okay, got it.
That's correct, yeah. Thanks for
Thank
Mr.
you.
Hagberg. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here we have the actual proposed capacity charges. So the meter size is on the left. The equivalency that we were talking about, that weighting, is there in the middle. We have our current charges and our proposed charges. So what we're looking at on the water side is an increase of about 7.2%. And some of the primary reasons for this increase is we are seeing an increase in cash-funded projects after the drought. So our last study was in 2017. You might recall during the drought, we kind of paused our main replacement program, things like that. After 2017, we really ramped back up, and actually, I think we doubled our target for main replacements. That program is all cash funded. So those capital investments are hitting the books now. And so we're collecting them within the capacity charge. Another thing we're seeing is we are starting to pay some debt service on some big capital investments. For example, the desal plant. Again, we started making some debt service payments in 2017, 2018. And so now that asset value is now coming onto the books because we've started paying for that. So that's why we're seeing a bit of an increase here. Looking down at the bottom is what Mr. Hagmark was referring to earlier on the dollar per fixture unit capacity charge. So in certain situations, this is namely for smaller multi-unit units where they have their own individual 5/8-inch meter, but they don't necessarily need the full capacity of a 5/8-inch meter, but we don't have anything smaller to offer them. They don't make anything smaller than that, really. So what we look at is the amount of proposed fixture units in the unit, and we use that to calculate their capacity charges. Now, fixture units are defined in the plumbing code. Not every plumbing fixture is equal. So, for example, a bathroom sink, I believe, is 1 fixture unit, whereas a tub, like a bathtub, is 4. So what they'll do is they'll provide us information on exactly what they're putting in their unit. We'll add up all the fixture units, we'll times it by the dollar amount. And that's how So a small, like, workforce housing unit that only has one bathroom, something like that, would see a capacity charge less than what you see up there for the 5/8 meter. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to what we're going to look at for our wastewater capacity charges. So we're actually seeing something a little bit different happening with wastewater than we are with water. We're actually seeing a bit of a decrease in the wastewater capacity charges. And a couple reasons for that. In our past study, we did a 5-year rate adoption schedule, and we did our best to estimate what inflation will probably be every year. We guessed 5%. That ended up being a bit high. So, that's why it outstripped our assumptions. And we are definitely making a lot of capital investments in our wastewater program, but they're not so much cash funded as much as the water program is. So we're having a lot of debt funded capital investments come into play here. And so as I mentioned earlier, we only include the value of those assets as we pay off the debt. So we haven't really started paying off a lot of this debt yet. So that's why these big projects that we're seeing being built aren't necessarily hitting the books for this specific charge because those debt payments haven't happened yet. And we have the same thing here as we do with water for the dollar per fixture unit, as you'll see down there. So for our multi-year adoption, we are planning on doing a 5-year adoption schedule like we've done in the past, and then after 5 years, we'll do another study. Instead of trying to guess at what inflation is going to be, we have decided to go ahead and just write into the resolution that we will be increasing the charges every year based on the actual inflation. And so we will be looking at what I mentioned earlier, the ENR CCI. So we'll be looking at what that has increased from March to March. And that will be the amount by which we increase the capacity charge. We decided to go that route this year in particular, just because, as you know, inflation is, it's hard to predict at this point in time. So it's, we don't want to try and guess and that be very off, and then there be having to need to be really big adjustments in future years. So that's why we want to base it on what's actually going to be happening with the CCI. And then jumping into just our adoption schedule, we're going to be going to Finance Committee May 10th, and we're going to be going with the rest of the enterprise funds fees. Again, this isn't a rate, this is a fee, so we're just going to be going with the rest of the enterprise funds fees. We do have to have a public hearing for these charges, just like we have to have a public hearing for our rates. So we will be holding a public hearing at City Council on June 14th, and they're slated for adoption at June 21st, and they will become effective July 1st. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Great, thank you. Are there questions from the commission? I have one, and it just goes to the last point you're talking about the variability in the inflation rate. So if you looked at the inflation rates over the next 3 to 4 years, and inflation was really high this year, but we anticipated it to be, and then it went down the next year, and then went back up in the 5th year, would you basically then be changing the capacity buy-in fee midterm, so that if you came online next year, you'd have a higher fee than if you waited a year?
Unless inflation is negative, the fee won't go down.
But if the inflation this year was 8%, let's just say it's 8%, but in 2 years from now, it goes down to 5%, right? Would 2 years from now, your buy-in fee be lower than it would be this year?
No, because the total inflation would be 8 plus 5.
Okay, I got it. You answered my question. It's a cumulative factor.
Yes, it's a cumulative factor.
Yeah, I didn't get that out of the information here. Thank you. Okay. Anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
No, there is not.
I don't see anyone coming up. So we're now back to the commission, looking for a recommendation.
I move to recommend.
Recommend staff recommendation. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Could I have a roll call vote, Madam Chair?
Chair Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Great. That motion is approved 4-0 with 1 absent.
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
Chair, we just recommended that the Finance Committee receive this.
Correct.
That seems kind of strange to me,
Well, it's the,
because of my ignorance.
well, again, being an old bureaucrat, it's the next step in the process. And it has to go to the finance committee before it goes to council. So we're moving it forward, moving this item forward to the next level.
Okay. And why do we have that ability to maybe deny the recommendation? Well,
But it's
Like,
the charter, but
is that
I'll let Jeff.
Right, so there's several issues, I think, speaking to the finance committee in particular, council has delegated them to take on financial matters first before they come to the council, kind of as a place of vetting some of these issues. So your recommendation onto them is important. Certainly, we could go to them with you denying that, and we would share that with them, and they would take that under consideration. But it wouldn't preclude us from going there. But we take that to them, and it's important that, the Water Commission, in this case, stood behind the recommendation. And then the council, the Finance Committee, I should say, would make a determination and say to forward it on to council for their consideration.
I get it. So I thought perhaps we had the power to prevent it from actually getting to finance, but we're not.
It would be a recommendation, it would be a recommendation to deny.
To deny,
or to
got it.
change, yeah.
Understood.
Well, I think,
Thank
and just as a administrative point, the staff report doesn't have the recommendation from the Water Commission in the staff report, as we normally do in our regular format.
Thank you, we'll make sure we add that in.
Okay, that moves us on to the next item.
All
This
right.
is item 6B, contract for environmental laboratory accreditation, implementation, and support services.
So Chair Davis, there is a lot going on in the world of the lab, and as you know, we have an accredited lab. And so Ms. Fair has been following this issue very closely, and she's going to enlighten all of us on what we're going to need to do going forward to remain an accredited lab.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mayor Davis, commissioners. Oh, am I not up? There we go. We'll try that again. Good morning. Back live and in person. So my name's Galen Fair. I'm the Water Quality Superintendent, overseeing the Water Resources Laboratory. So today we're going to talk to you about who we are, what we do, and the changes coming up for accreditation, and ask for a recommendation to enter into professional services with a consultant for laboratory accreditation, implementation, and support services. So first, we will, a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over our lab staffing and operations, really give you guys an idea of who we are, go over some of the current regulations, the new regulations, and then how we selected a consultant and what our future needs are going to be. So we'll dive into staffing and operations. So here's a very general org chart of water resources, just so you can see where we line up in the organization. So we are under water supply and services in water quality, and there is the Water Resources Lab. And one thing to note is, even though we're down there at the bottom, we help and we service all of the water resources, as well as many other city departments and divisions. So I will repeat myself. The Water Resources Lab supports city departments in any of the analytical testing needs. So that is going to be regulatory compliance, and a lot of it is also process control for our water and wastewater treatment plants. We have a lot of documentation. We report compliance with the regulations. We have a variety of regulations. Investigate water quality concerns. So we do get some phone calls from our public and questions about the water quality in general. And really what we do is we safeguard the public. So we have majority of the departments or divisions that we serve down there at the bottom. So everyone throughout Water Resources is, from distribution, collections, water and wastewater treatment. They're all doing amazing things to keep the public safe. And then anything that they need analytical testing wise, we support that. Okay, so this is us. I think we've got a few folks missing in that photo, but we have a water quality superintendent, a lab supervisor. We have a laboratory coordinator that oversees the day-to-day operations and really coordinates sampling and staffing. We also have a pre-treatment coordinator, and that person oversees our pretreatment program, so monitoring industrial users and whatnot before it gets to the treatment plant. We have 4 full-time lab analysts, and we have 3 hourly lab analysts to support that workload. One thing to note, the lab is staffed 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we don't get any breaks. We're always there, always able to perform those tests that are required for regulations. Okay, and this is a very brief overview of what we do, but we exist mostly for regulatory compliance. Water, wastewater, I think I go into it in a future slide on the permits. We perform sample collection, our analytical testing, quality control I will go over in a future slide, but that is a good portion of what we do. Pretreatment as well, reporting and documentation and data management, that is more than you would think it is. So all of the testing that we do, the data that we produce has to go somewhere, we have to do something with it. So we collect a variety of samples, surface water from Kachuma, Gibraltar, groundwater from our wells, drinking water once it's been treated, wastewater, industrial wastewater, recycled water, all mostly stemming from El Estero, and then stormwater in creeks. So different variety of samples. And then we have a wide range of analyses as well, microbiological, physical, and chemical. We do a lot of wet chemistry, and we do have some sophisticated instrumentation. So we have a total organic carbon analyzer. We have a, getting into the weeds here a little bit, but flame atomic absorbance spectrometer, and that's to monitor and analyze trace metals. And we also have an ion chromatography system to analyze anions like chloride, fluoride, et cetera.
You have a question?
Yes, a quick question. Beach sampling, do you do any beach monitoring on occasion as needed?
As needed, so there is a stipulation in our wastewater permit. If you hit a certain number, then you have to go, that triggers the beach monitoring. But we, in my 15 years, have never had to do that. Okay, so this is a little snapshot of what we do annually. We process 15,000 samples through our lab. 45,000 analyses are performed. And then what I'm including the quality control analyses on here because that is an additional workload that isn't necessarily thought about. So we do 9,000 additional analyses. It's basically another test. And one thing that I really like to tout is that 99% of our testing is done in-house. Only about 1% is contracted out, and that's usually because it's either only analyzed quarterly, semi-annually, so it doesn't make sense to have the instrumentation in-house. So we've got a good lab. Okay, and quality assurance and quality control. This is extremely important for a laboratory. Really, the data is worthless if you don't have any quality control or quality assurance. This way we are able to produce data that is scientifically validated and of known quality. So difference between quality assurance and quality control, QA, and you'll hear me reference QA, QC a lot. The QA refers to a broad plan, the overall system of a program, and it ensures the reliability of the data. Whereas quality control, those are the actual steps taken to determine the validity of specific sampling and analytical procedures. So we are able to verify if the precision and accuracy is there with the test. So just a quick example of the quality control, one of the steps is a duplicate analysis. So basically you have one sample, you analyze it twice in the exact same fashion, and that way you can assure that you're producing data that is reproducible and it's accurate. Okay, data management and reporting, again, a good portion of what we do. We are required to keep detailed records for traceability. We have a laboratory information management system, or LIMS, and that is basically our software that houses all of our data. It's our data management system. So of those 45,000 analyses, test results, that has to be stored somewhere, goes into our LIMS. We're able to retrieve information, produce reports. So that actually takes a lot of time entering and retrieving data. And then as far as reporting goes, the laboratory actually compiles and submits the regulatory reports for the city. So we have our drinking water reports, get all of the data, the treatment data from the treatment plants, from Cater, and then we compile that and submit it to the Division of Drinking Water. And for our wastewater reports, again, we produce a lot of the data, compile that, and submit the reports to the regional board. And then,
I was just going to add that we also do an element of that for desal as well, even though they are required to test their samples. We ultimately review their data and
correct, yeah. So desal is part of our drinking water permit, so we are essentially responsible for the data that they produce. And then lastly, we have our consumer confidence report that should be coming out in June. So it's basically a compilation of all of the data over a year and putting in a chart and sending it out to our customers. So a lot of data management, a lot of reporting that the lab does for the city. So next we'll get into our current certification and the new regulations. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time, lots of acronyms. We even have an acronym of an acronym in the next slide. So laboratory certification, it's administered by the State Water Resources Control Board from the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, ELAP. So I'll be referring to ELAP certification a lot. The certification is required to report analytical data for regulatory compliance with the Clean Water Act and our National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, so that's the wastewater side of things. We've got the Safe Drinking Water Act, Division of Drinking Water, again, drinking water side, and then our Environmental Protection Agency that is overseeing our biosolids and our industrial waste or pretreatment. So all of those regulatory permits, requirements, everything, if we're submitting data for any of those, has to be a certified laboratory. And this laboratory certification ensures that labs that are certified are generating data of known quality. Okay, so the Water Resources Lab is certified in 54 fields of accreditation, or FOAs. So think any tests that we perform. So pH, we've got E. coli, copper, hardness, just examples of a few. And that includes on different water matrices. So we've got potable, non-potable, and ambient waters. So for instance, E. coli, we have 2 different methods that we can test for E. coli. And we can do that on wastewater, non-potable / wastewater, drinking water, wastewater, and even ambient waters, which is surface waters, the ocean, et cetera. So although E. coli is one test, we actually have 6 FOAs because we have the different methods in the different matrices that we test it for. So there's a lot. Annual proficiency testing is required for each of these FOAs, and what that means is we get a blind sample, and we have to analyze per our normal procedures, and then we submit the results, and we find out if we got it right or not. And that's required for every single one of those FOAs. So that's done every year. And then we are required to have an on-site assessment, and that is an auditor comes in and spot checks our analytical methods for some of the FOAs. They can't do all of them. And then reviews our quality control criteria, make sure we're meeting those limits. And we have to renew our certification every 2 years. So changes. The ELAP regulations that are currently certifying labs, they had not been updated since 1994. So we're looking at almost 30 years. They're vague, they're outdated. The enforcement from the assessors was very inconsistent, and that was very frustrating for us. You might get one assessor 1 year, 2 years later get a different one. And what the previous assessor harped on and made sure you were doing The next assessor said, why are you doing it that way? Well, they told me I had to. Oh, well, that's wrong. So it was very frustrating for labs. And then the other thing is there is no requirement currently for a comprehensive quality system. There's requirements to have your QC data and policies and procedures, but nothing that really is a comprehensive system. So that's a big change. So in 2016, ELAP began considering new accreditation standards based on a lot of complaints from labs. And they started looking at the NELAC Institute, or TNI, the 2016 standard. So after some back and forth discussion with a lot of labs, the regulations, and all of getting them adopted, May 2020, the state board adopted the TNI, the 2016 TNI standard as the standard for ELAP regulations. So, next year, April 30th, the Water Resources Lab certification expires. So we will be in compliance with the help of our consultant we'll talk about shortly. We will be in compliance with that new standard. One thing to note is every California lab must be in compliance with the new standard come January 1st, 2024. So based on when our certification expires, it just makes more sense to get us into compliance ahead of time. So what is this 2016 TNI standard? It is a nationally accepted standard based on the International Organization for Standardization standard, the ISO standard, for testing and calibration labs. And it's used to manage all factors that can affect lab results. So we're talking supplies, equipment, training, tracking the chemicals, all of that stuff. And Volume 1, Management and Technical Requirement for Labs Performing Environmental Analyses, is a 180-page standard. So it's significantly more stuff to read through, get into compliance with. There are 7 modules in there, so each module is specific to a different requirement. That's getting way into the details. So the new requirements, we must follow the 2016 TNI standard. This has a lot of additional QA/QC requirements. Really focuses on traceability. So traceability, I mentioned that earlier, but I didn't really explain what it is. Basically, you need to be able to trace a sample or a result at any point in time. So the auditors, what they'll essentially do is they'll come in and they'll go through your files and say, take this piece of paper. Okay, at this point, you analyzed for pH. I want to know from this piece of paper which chemical standard you used, which pH meter you used, when the pH meter was calibrated. So anything that could affect the result, they want to be able to track based on basically pulling one piece of paper out. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to get into place to get us to that point. Standard operating procedures are going to be required for all activities.
I do. How far back are you keeping that data? Like, is there a rule or, because that kind of detailed data storage gets expensive quickly? Is that on premise or is that in the cloud?
Thank
Does
you,
it matter?
Commissioner Cooney.
Sorry,
No,
do you
no,
hate
no,
me
no,
for-
no. The question is funny because we have a shredder truck at El Estero today to get rid of all of our old paperwork. So the regulations, depending on which ones, so drinking water have a different time frame than wastewater, required to keep the records for, I want to say, 12 years is the longest, but most of them are 5. So we've got to be real organized with our data.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that just seems like a large amount of data to have to keep track of over time.
We have a tough shed, and it's full.
But so it's actual papers. It's
Yes.
not.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not a paperless process. Is that the
So we
goal,
have
or-
our LIMS system is more of the data warehouse so that we can pull the data easily, but we have handwritten.
It still points you towards
Yes,
handwritten
yes.
documentation, and that's
Going completely paperless is very difficult to do. So it's,
what I was asking.
yeah. I would love to, but it's a big undertaking.
Before you delete or destroy anything older than, say, 12 years or whatever the timing is, are they digitally backed up?
We have, ish. So most of our data will be retrievable from the LIMS system.
Okay.
So we have everything back to 2010 in that system, which, well, right at 12 years. But prior to that, it's, we weren't, the electronic portion of stuff wasn't as organized, you know. Basically from 2000 to 2010, we were really, you know, society in general was just getting into, okay, everything is going digital. So it's a little messy before 2010, but now we have everything very much organized. I actually just had this conversation with our pretreatment coordinator. What do we do with that electronic data? Because we can shred the physical papers, but that electronic data is still available, still discoverable. So I think that might be a question for Mr. Henschke over there for the future on what our policies are going to be for record retention for electronic records. Okay, thank you. Good questions. The new requirements, so standard operating procedures are going to be required for all activities. That includes analytical methods and policies and procedures. So we do have our analytical methods. We have standard operating procedures for those. They are going to be required to updated to a specific format. But one thing that is interesting for the new requirements is we're going to need to have a written policy for how we seek customer feedback. Is the treatment plant happy with the results they're receiving? And we actually have to have a policy on how we're going to do that. If they aren't happy, what do we do? So very, very detailed, very specific policies that we have to now document and record. And then the big thing is this implementing a quality management system. That's the majority of the new requirements. There's going to be document control that needs to go along with that. So what that means is these SOPs that I just mentioned, if everybody in the lab printed out an SOP for pH, they can make their own notes on that, and maybe they start doing that method a little bit differently. Can't do that. So the document control is, here is one document, that is what everybody is using. So getting into that practice is going to be a challenge. Additionally, there's going to be internal audits. Any findings from those internal audits, we're going to have to do corrective actions, document it. There's going to be data validation, data review processes, and I could go on with 10 more slides on what is going to be in this quality management system. So it's very, very big undertaking. And then the other big piece is in the standard, we must appoint a quality manager to perform all of the duties as described in the standard, but basically all of those duties to implement that and maintain that quality management system. So that is, that's new.
Do we need to hire additional staff to handle any of these new?
Perfect segue.
Was that in the staff? Was that in the staff report?
Subtly, it was.
Subtly, okay.
Subtly. So with these new requirements, our current staffing and workload, we cannot do the implementation in-house. We need the consultant expertise. Additionally, there's going to be an estimated 1,000 hours for this implementation. So that's going to be all of the staff that are going to need to get trained, change any of the documentation, including the consultant helping us get into compliance. And then moving forward, we will be needing additional resources to maintain that certification. So it's estimated 500 plus hours annually to perform those ongoing duties, and to we're asking for a consultant to serve as the quality manager because, again, current staff cannot absorb the workload.
And to say, we did reach out to our neighboring labs, not that there's a lot of them, but to try and see if it made sense for one of us to hire a quality manager that could serve. But everyone was kind of doing different things, so it didn't seem like there was a good place for that. So we ultimately landed on, I think, a consultant here. But this is a new industry. Just even a year ago when we seen this on the radar, Ms. Fair was looking around and consultants didn't even have these people. So it's really emerging, and but it sounds like they are going to step up because there's going to be a demand for it. So they're going to be filling this gap.
Okay. So after looking at all of these regulations, we realized we do need a consultant. We need the help. We don't have the staff to take it on ourselves. So we developed a request for proposal, and the requirements were to implement the T&I standard in the lab and to perform the duties for ongoing compliance. So the RFP scope of work really reflects that, 2 distinct phases. Year 1, implement the new requirements and assist us with our certification renewal. So April 30th, 2023, we need to have that renewed. They will assist with that. And then year 2 is provide the quality manager services to make sure we are keeping our compliance, keeping our certification. So we received 4 proposals. The selection was based on experience, approach to the scope of work, references and project timeline. And what was really interesting is we got a really wide range of estimated hours for each year. So that first year, to get us into compliance and implement everything, we saw a range of 900 to 250 hours to get us there. And that was the consultant's time. And then year 2, the quality manager services, anywhere from a little over 1,000 to 250. So depending on how in-depth they were going to go, how much they were going to rely on us, that I think is where the variability in hours really came from. And after reviewing everything, staff selected A2LA Workplace Training, AWPT, to provide the services requested, and the state board actually hired them to train the rest of the labs. All of the California labs offered training for us to, hey, we have these new regulations. This is what they are. So they really know what they're doing. So we selected them. So today I am asking that the Water Commission support staff recommendation that council award a professional services contract to AWPT and authorize the Public Works Director to exercise up to 3 one-year renewal options to provide the quality manager services.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. Learned a lot. Questions from the commission?
One.
Go ahead, Jeff.
How have we done over the years with auditing on us when ELAP has come in and done their auditing?
Thank you, Commissioner Young. We haven't, I take that back. We had an audit, we're supposed to have one every 2 years. I think we've had 2 audits in the last 6. So in our 2018 audit, that was really when the state was trying to evaluate a lot of things and change things up. So we did get hit really hard with that audit. There were just some things that, again, previous auditors never looked at, so we didn't, I didn't know about that. So we got hit with a lot, added a lot of additional testing, which really increased the lab's workload. And a lot of it is those QC steps. So since then, and you're going to find something every time. We can't be perfect. So what we've really tried to instill in the staff and even get myself in that state of mind is this is an opportunity to improve our data. So anytime we get a finding, look back and say, wow, you're right, we missed that, didn't even think about it. You see something every day. And so since then, we've had one just on our wastewater side of things. We weren't audited on the drinking water, and I think we had maybe 4 or 5 items that were very easy fixes. So I'm very nervous and excited.
Are these things that would affect the veracity of the test results, or are they kind of, because you can have infractions on paperwork and how you document things and all that kind of business, and
Yeah.
there's others that would be a lot more basic that could affect the validity of the results.
Yeah, so most of them were paperwork. It was just, you didn't write down which balance you used, so that we can't have that traceability when we pull a piece of paper, versus you didn't calibrate the balance would be a huge issue. So they were more on the paperwork side of things. And we did have a pre-assessment to the new standards, and we haven't done anything yet to get into compliance. So that was very eye-opening that, wow, there's a lot we need to do. There's a significant amount of work. We're in compliance with the current regulations, but not the future.
And then you mentioned that you also audit the desal test results, and that's because we have a separate contractor that's doing that work. How have they fared?
So the challenge there is we are reviewing their data for what they submit to, what we submit to the Division of Drinking Water. So they are not a certified lab, so any of their lab data they have to, or any of their samples they have to send out to a certified lab. So that lab then gets audited. And anything that we do for the desal plant, we're auditing ourselves or we're getting audited. So at this point, we're only doing microbiological analyses for the desal plant.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very complete presentation. So a couple of questions. One, on this A2LA consultant, where did they fare in terms of the range of hours that you had mentioned?
Good question.
Great question. They were actually on the low end, and it was a big concern for me because looking at everything, I actually called and asked. I said, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And they said, "This is what we think we can do it in.
Okay.
If it ends up that we go over, we'll just." That's what's going to happen. They'll just lose money, I suppose. But they were very confident that they'd be able to accomplish it. They're very focused on training, which was one of the big pluses that I saw.
And then on the year two, the ones they have someone that's going to be the quality manager, will they have someone, is it full-time or is it just they will be coming part-time? And what's the plan after that to evaluate whether there's a need for someone here or not?
So they estimated, I had a conversation with their vice president, their estimate was a quarter to a third of an FTE to perform those
Okay.
duties.
Okay. Makes sense.
We're hoping that, we go the full 3 years with them, additional 3 years, and they're able to perform those duties. But as of right now, we don't have the staff to absorb that. So that's going to be a big question that we have to answer in the future. Who is going to take on those responsibilities? Does it warrant an additional person, not at a quarter to a third of an FTE, but how do we manage that?
And I think what's complicated about this when we were looking into it is that this quality person couldn't also be running samples, so they had to be somewhat
Right, they have to be
separated.
separate, right.
So what do you do with their time outside of this? So it was kind of complicated.
Right. Yeah, and if it's only a quarter to a third of an FTE, it may not make sense to have someone full-time to do that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, and then this final question is very different. So I know I think it's the California Department of Health Services has a number of chemicals they're concerned with that are not yet regulated, but they want to keep tracking in terms of in water sources like surface waters, drinking water sources, groundwater sources. And I know you must be doing some tracking of that. So is that done? Because those are very specific tests for things that you don't usually do. How do you do that?
Great question. So the EPA, I believe it is, there is the unregulated contaminants rule. So we are actually in the beginning stages of UCMR 5, and those are these contaminants of emerging concern. Goes through a vetted process, and about every 5 years or every 4 years, you get a list of 30 that you've got to test for. So that's that we're required to do, and that's coming up. So we're looking into labs who can perform those analyses because they are very specialized. So that's one way. And then another thing that I'm sure all of you guys are aware of, we are sampling for our SARS-CoV-2, and still continuing with that effort. So that is just more of an informational, nobody's asking us to do it at this time, but we think it's great information. So it's actually fascinating.
Yeah.
So monitoring for, like, I know we did an extensive analysis of PFAS and we didn't find anything. There currently is there a requirement to do some type of regular PFAS?
I anticipate that's coming.
It's coming, yeah.
coming.
And then I know there's a big focus right now, particularly on plastics in the wastewater. Are we sampling for that? I know, and we're sending it out to get sampled. Are we doing any type of?
At this point, we are not performing any microplastics sampling or testing. I know there's been in the past, some coordination with UCSB and doing some microplastics there. But at this point, there aren't any requirements for us. So that's one of the balancing acts we have to do is this is really great information. We'd love to test for it, but we're not required to. And at what dollar amount do we balance that out? And so
that list of the CECs or
The ECMR is called the listing.
Yeah.
the unregulated ones,
Yeah.
how many are on that list?
they typically do about 30 per.
No, but there's a master list.
I see what you're
I
saying.
understand that they only do 30 every year or two, but isn't the list with thousands of
I would
chemicals?
imagine it is. I haven't seen it. I haven't looked, mostly because,
It's about 150
overwhelming.
to 200 in terms of the ones that have been sort of tracked. So this is the fifth one, so they've been tracking these. And so there's, of course, many, many more, but they look at which ones are likely to be affecting sources, and that's how they identify the ones that they're going to be tracking for the next few years.
yeah. And the great part about the UCMR testing is it's really it's an exploration of what is present. And depending on the results that they get back from the country, then they will develop maximum contaminant levels that you have to start testing for it, and you have to make sure that it's below certain levels in your water system. So it's really a neat process.
Great. Well, thanks, Ms. Ferrer, for the presentation. Anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Come on, you guys. Just kidding. Not hearing anyone, I'll close the public session on this. So we're to the recommendation. You want to go back a slide and put that up there if you could? Sorry to do that to you. I just didn't want to read it. It's really long. Okay. Authorize Public Works Director to award professional service contract to A2LA Workplace Training, Inc. in the amount of $148,300 for laboratory environmental accreditation, implementation, and support services, and approve expenditures of $14,830 for extra services that may result from necessary changes in the scope of work. And item recommendation B, authorize the Public Works Director to exercise up to 3 one-year renewal options with A2LA Workplace Training, Inc. to provide quality control services in the annual amount of $83,000. That's the staff's recommendation. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll call, please?
Chair Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0 with 1 absent. I'll also make the same comment that I did before. The Water Commission recommendation is buried in the budget financial information. Pull it down below and show it after environmental review. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's always informational, and good luck. That moves us on to item 7, Water Resources Manager's Report. Mr. Hagbart.
Chair Davis, Commissioners. Packet went out yesterday. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if there's anything significant. I mean, we can talk a little bit. We've been talking water supply. Obviously, we are gearing up for a water supply discussion next month. Today, the State Water Resources Control Board is having a pretty significant meeting. We're hoping to get some more information out of where exactly they intend to go with any type of mandates. So more to come. We have internally restarted our drought core team meeting, so we're meeting pretty regularly to talk now about messaging and just coordinating all the different pieces that it is required to be responsive to water supply shortages. So we're working on that. The community seems to continue to be doing their part. It's been an awfully dry few months, so we are seeing an uptick in water usage, but it's, you know, given how dry it's been, it's not unusual. More of it will be interesting to see what happens, I think, this summer. Of highlight in here, I don't know, one of the things that I was looking through these slides and, you know, teasing out different information. We have this graphic here, and again, this shows not the city's water in Kachuma, but all the water in Kachuma. And was just noting where the reservoir is right now versus where likely it should be if it was following the same trends of past droughts, if you want to call it that. And really, when you start looking in here, there's about 15 to 20,000 acre feet of water in Kachuma that, if not for the city's efforts in desal and conservation, would not be there, and we'd be trending probably more closely to where it is right now. And again, these little things that just kind of stand out to me when you start teasing out the data. Why is it trending differently? And you know, I think in general, that seems to be a big outlier for
That's
me.
an interesting observation. I hadn't thought of that when I looked at that graph, but that's really an interesting observation.
Yeah, so more to come. I think of highlight, one of the things that now I think we've kind of passed that window where we're going to see any measurable rainfall is the secured pipeline. So this is kind of the COMB board's going to be taking action soon to initiate that project. And I think construction will start sometime in the fall to put in that pipeline from the current tower out about a third of the way where the barge, if you may recall, where the barge was initially put. And so that'll be really helpful in taking out some of, it'll buy us some more time because putting in the temporary piles and all that took a lot more time last time. And so we had to award the contract to get the barge out there sooner. I think it'll buy us some more time. And again, it also buys us time if the reservoir comes up and goes down. That was always one of those complicating factors when we had that floating pipeline. So I think the secured pipeline is going to be really helpful in that area. I didn't really have any other major outliers to talk about in
I
here.
think we have some questions.
Just
or-
on the recycled production, I see that we're producing more recycled water, which is great. Is that because there's increased demand from the existing customers, or do we have new customers that are requiring more? And how do you balance that, the particular demand?
That's a good question. I think we're seeing parks usage is obviously because it's been so dry. Their usage is up, and then you know, effective March. No, sorry, is that April 1st? No, March. We had our agreement with La Cumbra go into effect. Gosh, time flies. It was like in beginning of April we did that. Anyway,
Yeah,
we started making deliveries to them. So yeah, we are seeing increase. That's a good observation. We are seeing an increased usage, and a lot of that is just how dry it's been. Yeah. And then we do have our COVID graphic, which again, we're doing more sampling now, 5 days a week. And continues to kind of bob along here, but as we know, it's popping up here and there. I know we've had potential case in City Hall, and I know Cora Kammeier, Commissioner Kammeier could not be here today because there was something at her workplace as well, and so it's still relevant in the community, and I think it's difficult when we're planning these meetings, you know, to get everybody here. It's tough. So appreciate you guys showing up today.
No, thank you.
On this point, I mean, I think, I'm glad that the city has kept this monitoring, and in fact, we're seeing now that it's gone not only to the state, but the federal level, that, there's many other wastewater systems that are monitoring it, but they've now realized the value of having this information for public health, tracking, and really, I think it's gonna be something that we'll be seeing almost as a requirement in the future, not just for this, but for other illnesses, to track the incidence of disease, to try to get a sense of what's happening, and the wastewater is the best way to find out, so. I'm glad
Yeah, and
we did that.
I can only hope that this eventually comes with funding. I mean,
Yes.
that's that's the fun part is.
Unfunded
I
mandate.
think it, yeah, and I think it does have a huge benefit to the community, one could argue the wastewater customers are also the customers of the public health system. I mean, but I think a good conversation about where that should be coming from, particularly like right now, we're partnering with Cottage, so Cottage is kicking in some money now to help with this, which is helpful. But I also know there's a long list of other things that public health is interested in knowing, particularly drug use, diabetes in the community. There's all kinds of things that they could tell by looking at the wastewater and whether there's some funding out there to kind of get that going.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Does anyone wish to ask any questions of Mr. Hagmark at this point? Not seeing any. Our next meeting will be Thursday, May 19th, 2022 at 9 a.m. right back here in the David Gebhardt Meeting Room. So hopefully we'll all see you again in a month. Thank you very much for the meeting.